If you told me that I would one day be tearing up over Mayuri and Nemu, I would have been like, yeah, maybe tears of joy if she turns on him for all of his abuse. I wouldn't have believed you if you said that this relationship would one day be something really profoundly emotional, still disturbing, but emotional and maybe even a little sweet in its own twisted way. I don't know how Kubo did it, but he did. It's kind of amazing how Bleach continues to surprise me so far into its run. This was one of the most unexpected and more intimate developments of the series for me for a plethora of reasons. So let's talk about it, and I'm going to try not to cry, because honestly guys, this also struck on another level for me that only hits harder the more I've analyzed these chapters and these episodes. Let's get into it. So we have Mayuri and Kenpachi together, which I've been so excited about. For those who have watched my channel for a while, you probably know that these two are some of my absolute favorite characters in the series, who couldn't be more different, and I love them for different reasons, so I was really happy to see them team up. It's like a nerd and the school bad boy being forced to work together. Just an interesting and somewhat hilarious pairing. Even their squads being together offered something interesting as well. You've got Kenpachi's squad who revere him and respect his strength, and you've got Nemu who has always been so utterly loyal to Mayuri, for better or worse. Much more on that later, trust me. There's a lot to unpack if you look back on how Kenny has gained the devotion of his subordinates compared to Mayuri having to literally create and mold someone into being utterly obedient to him at all times, that he created something to serve him rather than won the respect of any peers. But yeah, of the few groups we have on this battlefield right now, of all the Soul Reapers invading, this was probably the strike force I was most excited to follow, so I'm really glad we got this, and it doesn't go in any of the directions I really thought it would, like, at all, and I love that. I've talked about how I felt bad for whoever was going to go up against these two, but I wasn't expecting Kenpachi and Mayuri to have this opponent. Yeah, so things naturally get a little strange when they face off with our resident Jawa, Pernita, and we continue to see just how weird his power is. Like, remember in the MCU, I think it was Age of Ultron, when Agent Hill was talking about Wanda Maximoff, and the only way she could describe her powers at the time was, she's weird. That's how Pernita's abilities have felt since they were first shown. He's weird. I didn't know what exactly was happening, just that he was twisting and squishing things somehow. I thought maybe telekinetically or something along those lines initially, but among the other Quincy Royal Guards, this quiet, cloaked little guy was by far the most mysterious and the most peculiar. He didn't show his face. He was pretty much silent and would speak in ways that we couldn't understand when he did speak. His powers were kind of undefined, and we finally start to get answers about Pernita, but not because of Kenny, really. Kenpachi does what Kenpachi does and tries to cut him down immediately in a head-on assault, but ends up having one of his arms all twisted and warped, so he has to rip it off and then it explodes, which was crazy, but not too surprising, honestly. Kenny isn't the type to sit back and analyze the situation. Kenpachi's version of analysis is cutting into someone and seeing what happens, or being cut and seeing what happens. He wants to feel their strength. He wants to gauge his own excitement personally. He's the kind of guy that needs a tactile example to get his hands dirty. I love him, but he's not a thinker in the way Mayuri is. He's not a strategist. He just does things. And that's exactly what Mayuri was counting on, because we come to realize that he was essentially using Kenny as like a guinea pig to help figure out the enemy's capabilities, which is just like the most Mayuri thing to do. He literally stabs him in the back, which was a shocking moment, but it was really so he could save him from that situation and take him off the board after he wasn't going to be useful to him anymore. It was a great little character beat that I really liked. Mayuri is twisted and shady, but he will help you, just in a way that won't feel like it at the time. As a big Kenpachi Zaraki fan, was I a little bummed that he was removed from the fight? Maybe a little at first. Kubo more than makes up for it with what comes next. No, this fight had the perfect combatants. Throughout this little section, something starts stirring beneath Pernita's cloak, puffing him up into odd shapes as his whole robe starts coming apart, and I was so ready to finally see what was under the hood. I've talked before about how I was thinking he was like a formless, shapeless void under there, and then once we started to see more of his powers here and how they work, I thought maybe he'd just be like this circulatory system walking around, but nope, not at all. I gotta say, I never, ever would have predicted what he is when it's revealed that underneath the cloak is the left arm of the Soul King. Pernita has been the left arm of the Soul King the whole time. Yeah, remember how I recently learned Mimi Hagi was the right arm of the Soul King? This is its counterpart. And looking back at things for this video, there were a few signs that maybe I should have caught, but I don't feel too bad that I didn't. I'm me. I'm sometimes not the most observant when it comes to particular things, but yeah, Pernita's Volsterndish wings that we saw also look like hands for one thing. That's clever, and I definitely didn't connect that. And it's only been a couple videos since I was thinking about the arms of the Soul King and where the left one could be, but yeah, this didn't occur to me. Nope. I guess I should have considered something like this, and I was thinking maybe someone we knew could have it, but as far as Pernita literally being the arm, yeah, I didn't think of that one. In that anime additional scene with the meeting between Ichibei and Yuabaha, it's shown that Yuabaha takes the left arm from Ichibei, but that didn't really register with me fully at the time. There was a lot going on in that scene that I was trying to figure out, and I didn't fully grasp that he literally stole the left arm at that point. But man, I wished we'd had a scene with Pernita and Ukatake with Mimi Hagi. That would have been a hell of a fight, just full-on arm wrestling. Would have been great. I also honestly had way too much fun reading for Pernita in my manga read-along when I saw this. Left arm not name. Name Pernita. Pernita Barkjaw. Sound familiar? I mimic you. Pernita Quincy. Can kill enemy with bow and arrow. On one hand, looks over at the other ones and is like, oh shit. Oh no. Insult from enemy. Insult to Quincy. I really wish. That would be so good. Maybe the anime will. It's just such a wonderfully bizarre concept, and I'm all about this kind of thing. One of my favorite comic villains is Shumagorath, who is this eldritch terror god that is essentially just an eyeball with tentacles. But he's the best. He's awesome. He's scary. Ignore the sort of kind of attempt at bringing him into the MCU. That was Gargantos. Yeah, it's complicated. Anyway, discovering that he's this giant arm god, a piece of the Soul King himself that acts as his own entity just like Mimi Hagi, it naturally raises a lot of questions for me. Like, what is one of the arms of the Soul King doing serving Yuabaha as a Quincy soldier and proudly calling himself a Quincy? Pernita makes a real point about that. That is how he sees himself. And while I'm going to respect his position, I've still got to wonder how he came to this conclusion, from being a godly power to kind of relegating himself to a foot soldier. Or I mean a royal guard, I suppose. That's not as lowly, but still. I guess Yuabaha being the originator of the Quincy's could mean that his father was the real source of that power. So in a roundabout way, this arm kind of would be a Quincy if maybe the Soul King was kind of technically Quincy adjacent, or, you know, the Quincy power was a part of him. But yeah, Pernita can do Quincy things like constructing the bow and arrows, which was hilarious to watch it fire between its fingers, by the way. Yeah, maybe that's a reason. Maybe it's because of the Yuabaha's connected to the Soul King, and the Quincy power, you know, might be part of in the blood, I suppose. And the Quincy power's been shown to be in the blood, at least the shrifts are, so maybe. Or maybe when Yuabaha took the arm way back, he's like brainwashed it or corrupted it into forgetting what it really was to begin with. Maybe Pernita is just completely under Yuabaha's control as more of a prisoner because his fingers are chained initially, so maybe that's more evidence that he was unwillingly enslaved by the Quincy's, and maybe it's like Stockholm Syndrome. I don't know. And we aren't given much of an explanation, but there's an initial simpleness to Pernita that seems to evolve and learn over time as he touches things. So maybe he just picked up the traits of other Quincy's along the way. We're really just spitballing ideas here. I'm throwing everything at the wall. Maybe one of these theories is correct. But yeah, when it comes down to it, Yuabaha has just been walking around with his dad's arm. Nothing weird about that. Nope, totally not. And his dad's arm helped orchestrate the murder of the body that he used to belong to, and, depending on the version you're experiencing, the absorption of his other arm. It's a lot to think about here. It's a very weird dynamic going on as this arm betrayed the body that he once served. Or maybe he's helping free the body like Yuabaha thinks he is. The Soul King stuff is complicated and I still need to know more. But yeah, Pernita for some reason helped Yuabaha with all of this. Invade the Soul King's palace, absorb the Soul King. On the other hand, maybe this is just Pernita's nature. We know that the left arm represents advancement. So maybe it wants change, and it wants things to evolve and to not have the universe be stuck in a status quo. Its reasoning isn't made entirely clear, but like with the Soul King, I'm not sure that I'm supposed to be fully able to comprehend the decisions of something divine. There's like a separation of I'm not supposed to be able to understand something so far above me. It's unknowable. Pernita really is at least a piece of a god. Mayuri is using science against something that's holy, and that's really interesting in a lot of ways because so much of what Mayuri does and what he has been doing the whole series and throughout the history of the story feels like he's raging against the natural order. His experiments and his methods often feel like these disgusting violations and these abominations. Mayuri is a mad scientist who spits in the face of what's supposed to be natural and sacred, pushing the boundaries of what should be possible, sometimes in grotesque ways. So there's that angle of science versus divinity, and Pernita representing advancement is so fitting too, considering how Mayuri views science and progress and his long-held belief that the idea of perfection is a fallacy, as he's much more interested in seeing things develop and change and grow and evolve and advance. More on that later, but this is really the perfect enemy for him and Nemu to be up against. Mayuri is able to match Pernita's weirdness with his own weirdness. Like, we get the usual freaky Mayuri stuff. His Zanpakuto starts screaming, he has these living umbrellas with faces on them that are apparently alive, and he uses them as decoys and shields, and they're screaming. I have this terrible thought that these are made from his test subjects, maybe even some Quincy, but I hope not. But I also wouldn't be remotely surprised, you know what I mean? He's capable of anything. The worst one, but also kind of funny in a terrible way, was him like slingshotting these screaming exploding heads. Mayuri, are you okay? Don't answer that. I know the answer. On a side note, Mayuri acting like he's making this big scientific discovery where he wanted to name Pernita was incredible. It had me honestly rolling because it's still so true to his character, but it's so funny. Like, of course he would try to take credit for this. He'd be like, I have discovered something nobody else has ever seen. I should get naming rights, like legal rights. This is my discovery, my accomplishment. I loved that. That was so funny. Like, let's just ignore that Pernita's been living with the Quincy's this whole time and clearly was discovered long ago. This whole fight gives us a much better understanding of Pernita's abilities as well. He's got these nerves that spread from him that can take control of all kinds of things, both living and inanimate. And once they connect to you, you're pretty much done. We saw what those nerves did to Kenny's arm, and here we see how they're really putting Mayuri on the ropes, but I love all the clever ways he tries to counteract that. The nerves redirecting a missed Quincy arrow, and eventually, like, connecting to the arrows was all actually insane though. Such a powerful ability that I think most Soul Reapers wouldn't have been able to counter. Which makes sense. This is an arm of the Soul King. It should be powerful. It should feel unstoppable. Mayuri's now iconic sunsuit is destroyed, which is a real tragedy for the world of fashion, but I always love how adaptable Mayuri is. He's got something for everything, including stealing a Quincy levitation technique, which is just straight up disrespectful given his history, but he also shows a different aspect to his Bankai, rooted in his ability to alter things. It's absolutely crazy that he can modify and personalize it to fit what he needs in the moment, to take on specific opponents, to be able to counter what he's up against. But that fits with his whole shtick as a fighter. It's about analysis. It's about counteracting people, you know? He's always got a cure for whatever poison he's up against. The design for this Bankai was fittingly unpleasant, but it also does kind of show us a parent that's birthing something that has adapted and evolved from what we've seen before, and that's kind of a hint to what's going on within Mayuri and what's to come. I'm getting there, trust me, I'm getting there. It was a great sequence and an unexpected little shift to the usual poison caterpillar baby that I'm used to, which is weird to say, but I expect that now, where at one point in time that felt so weird. Pernita's abilities just get stranger and stranger, and he actually really puts Mayuri on the ropes until he's rescued by Nemu, which is especially unexpected because he never gave her instructions to help him. He never told her to, and he certainly never taught her to come to his aid of her own accord. But here she is, and she did it all on her own. Nemu made her own personal decision, which we've literally never seen, so I was surprised. But even more importantly, Mayuri was surprised. Very, very surprised. And that brings me to Nemu. I've talked before in my ranking videos and a theory video about how Nemu has always interested me. The fact that she was created by Mayuri, yet was a Soul Reaper lieutenant, was always thought-provoking, even when it wasn't given much focus before because of the implications that had for both of these characters. On one hand, it said a lot about Mayuri's capabilities as a scientist, since it feels like kind of a big deal that he full-on created his own lieutenant, a full-fledged Soul Reaper. But on the other hand, it's fascinating because of what it always showed about Nemu. It set her apart from most every other character, except for maybe a couple, but we'll get to that later. We didn't know much about Nemu's origins, but I had my own theories I was trying and failing to cook. My favorite being that she was developed based on Mayuri's dissection of Quincy's, so I thought maybe he used parts of Quincy's to create her, so in some ways she kind of is a Quincy. At one point, that might have meant a lot to Uryu to not be alone, you know, before a whole secret sect of fascist Quincy's showed up to the story. Anyway, I was really proud of myself for this theory because it could explain some things, like her not showing her Zanpakuto or how she looked at Uryu that time. Plus, it would have just been a further slap in the face that Mayuri would be giving the Quincy, desecrating them in order to use them for his own purposes. I really had my fingers crossed for that one, but it's me, and I'm not known for having my Bleach theories come true. Definitely not. And I mean, I guess we still don't know the exact specifics to her creation, so maybe there's some Quincy in there, but that's just me coping. But Quincy or not, what we're given is fantastic, as she really shines. And I loved the little build-up to it. Unfortunately, part of what has made Nemu Nemu throughout the series is how she is constantly off to the side, only ever jumping into the fray when specifically told to, constantly left out of combat. Up until this point, at least in the canon, I don't know about her role in filler arcs yet, she hasn't really had a fight. She was used as a shield by Mayuri during his fight with Uryu way back, and she was violated by Xyloporo, and that's pretty much it. But here, she dives into battle to save Mayuri without being told to, by her own prerogative, and I love that part of the slight hints towards this was she gives her opinion and shocks her fellow lieutenants. Like, they are shocked that she has anything of her own to say. And it was like, oh, she does have her own thoughts. She does have her own opinions. But yeah, she saves Mayuri. She makes her own choice to save her creator, even at her own expense. She learned how to do that on her own. He never taught her. He never instructed her to. Mayuri is equally baffled, insulted, even a little proud, as she's showing real signs of individuality and the capacity to learn on her own, being able to make her own choices without prompts, to be her own person. and to do something that Mayuri didn't think she was capable of doing, and he's the one that made her. So Mayuri is reacting to this with all these emotions, and it's like kind of hard to peg what exactly he's actually feeling, but I'm not sure he even fully understands, because there's something beneath all of this. One of the most powerful moments to me was Mayuri yelling at her, telling her that because she's his creation, only he gets to decide the time and place of her death, and only on his orders. The sense of ownership is cruel on the surface, but what really is being said, at least this was what I was getting from it, is do not die. He wants to protect her and keep her from harm. And whether or not that's because he actually cares about her or whether he just wants to protect his intellectual property, that's up for debate. It's probably a little bit of both, but personally, I think it felt more like he really was trying to keep her out of harm's way. But once he sees her step in, he starts to let her help in his fight. That alone was such a big development considering he trusted her to help, and she did more than just follow his commands. Once again, she made her own choice, and this time she fully gives herself over to protect her creator. And for the first time, Mayuri fully respects her autonomy and leaves the battle in her hands. And there were very obvious echoes here of a parent finally letting go a little bit, letting them make their own choices, their own mistakes. She is his creation, and she's making her own decisions and leaving him behind. She's a daughter growing up, and he is a father starting to finally recognize that and accept it. He finally sees her as more than just something that he brought to life. He's seeing her actually live. And that was what was really striking to me. It's beautiful, so freaking beautiful. And all of this is only made more powerful as it's during this part that Kubo finally shows us Nemu's early life and the secrets to her creation. Because it turns out Nemu was not Mayuri's first subject in his experiment to create a true artificial soul. No, she is the 7th. And side note, learning that one of the previous attempts was placed inside Mayuri's Zanpakuto, and that's why there's like a screaming baby in his sword, was a great bit of lore and absolutely horrific, but also apparently was what helped him earn the position of captain, which that feels right for Mayuri. He's like, hey, look at this weird thing I did. I love that it was his intellect and his ingenuity, disturbing as it is, that put him in that position, and it wasn't just his power or his combat prowess. That works so well for his backstory. But yeah, while her predecessors didn't develop into successes, Nemu was the first one to actually last, and that fact alone gives her so much more significance to Mayuri, even if he doesn't outright admit it. Obviously, on a scientific level, he loves that one of his experiments is actually progressing, especially when all of his other ones were failures or that he had to discard or utilize in other ways. But on a father level, he lost children and now has only one to care for, and he's not the most caring person. But I love that we got a glimpse of Mayuri's hopes and dreams through Akon telling Nemu, and even then, he mostly has to read between the lines because Mayuri isn't one to talk about his feelings. Creating a truly living soul was Mayuri's dream, and Nemu is that dream brought to reality. Like, he wouldn't acknowledge that openly, but it's still true. And Nemu hearing that, even from someone else, helped give her insight into someone that is very hard to deal with, I'm sure. I also loved that Nemu's directive, the purpose he gave her for being, is to grow and to learn, because not only does that obviously reflect Pernita's advancement thing, but also perfectly represents Mayuri's vision of ever-evolving, ever-changing discovery, of always pushing past so-called perfection, of never being stagnant, of never stopping, of always moving forward, always growing. Nemu is the epitome of everything that he believed in, all condensed into one body. And yet the success of who she is, how imperfect and human she is what makes her his most perfect experiment. She's perfect in her imperfection. She's a success. She's the perfect creation that he was hoping for because she's imperfect. That is what parents should strive to see from their children. Change and growth and finding themselves, finding their own voices, finding their own thoughts. There's nothing like that of seeing a soul that you created develop. And if I'd read this part of the story earlier than I did, this wouldn't have hit me nearly as hard as it did, because this is something that I've kept totally private from the channel, but now feels like a really appropriate time to talk about it because of how it relates to this section of Bleach and my own experience reading and watching it. So it's a bit of an announcement, but a couple months ago I became a father when my son was born, and it has already been one of the most interesting, challenging, and fulfilling times of my life. And a lot of the thoughts I've had and the observations I've made, they were really reflected in Kubo's writing here. The things that were being talked about, how Mayuri watched Nemu develop and grow and become his greatest creation, all of that hits so hard for me now because that's something I felt a lot in this time of my life, to be able to just witness a life be brought into the world and start to grow into its own unique individual. It's been completely different than anything else in my life, and honestly a happiness that's hard to fully quantify. So that someone like Mayuri is feeling any of that, to have a love and an admiration for something that he brought into the world that reflects him but goes beyond him, it just hits. Fatherhood in Bleach is something that has obviously gotten some focus, mainly through Isshin and Ryukin and how they relate to their sons, and more recently we've gotten a pretty one-sided look from Yuabaha at his own father, with some cosmically large family drama, and now, shockingly, I'm looking at Mayuri Kuretsuchi of all people as one of the fathers in the series. I'm definitely not looking at him for inspiration as a father, but yeah, this weird, clown-faced, cybernetic mad scientist, occasional goop man is a dad. And this may be the first time he really starts to see that. He's called Nemu his daughter before, but it only ever came from a place of ownership, of her being beholden to him for giving her life. But now I think he's really starting to realize in these moments, when it might almost be too late, his fatherhood is deeper than that. That he finally feels love towards this person who's more than just an experiment, who's his family, his offspring. And then he watches his greatest creation, his daughter, die in front of his eyes trying to protect him, after Nemu chose her own fate and chose to put herself on the line. In a worse writer's hands, this could have really fallen flat, and felt like she threw her life away for her abuser. But because of what Kubo showed of what Nemu knew about Mayuri, the feelings he never wanted to show, and never wanted her to know about, I think it manages to navigate all of that well enough to make her sacrifice not only powerful, but to make me feel bad for Mayuri in this moment. And that's something I didn't think I would do. I didn't think I would feel bad for him. The aftermath of this definitely helps, with the devastating look on his face. And in the anime, the music that plays, and just as he's just standing there stunned. We have never, ever seen Mayuri like this before. We've seen him treat everything and everyone in either a cold, analytical way or a straight-up sadistic way. But this is the first time I've seen him actually show real sadness over something happening to someone else, where Mayuri actually shows empathy. There's a real hurt over losing Nemu. And it's not just shocking for us to see him this way, but it's even shocking for Mayuri himself. We get a glimpse of his inner thoughts and a very specific form that those thoughts take. And I've got to say, it was such a pleasant surprise to see Xyloporo again. Even if it was only as a mental manifestation, actually especially because of how brilliantly he was used in this particular way. Of all the characters in Bleach, Xyloporo's defeat is probably the one I think about the most because of just how scary it was. The actual logistics of all of that was haunting. It's been well over a year in the story, I think, actually closer to 2 at this point. And as far as Xyloporo's brain knows, he's still waiting for that blade to reach him, even though he's been dead since then. That's so scary. Back when he was alive and he fought Mayuri, I talked about how Xyloporo thought he was the perfect specimen, and Mayuri's reveal that he didn't believe in perfection. So despite surface-level similarities as mad scientists with these messed up experiments, there was a massive difference in their philosophies. It was such a powerful and extremely insightful speech Mayuri gave back then, so bringing Xyloporo back right here as almost an echo of those words that Mayuri spoke, a reminder of how he doesn't believe in perfection, was, somewhat ironically, perfect. The Xyloporo we see here is a projection of that part of Mayuri as the cold, unfeeling, sadistic scientist that shouldn't care about his experiments, that taunts him and laughs at him, throwing his own words in his face. It's honestly so fascinating that this is how this part of Mayuri presented itself in his mind. And after being taunted and ridiculed by that part of himself, the part that thinks he's weak and a hypocrite, and if he believes that Nemu is perfect, which I think he does, then by his own words, he's not a real scientist. But after listening to that part of himself, he silences it and then buries his feelings. And this is probably what he does a lot. So to see it visualized, to really understand what's going on in his head a little bit, I thought was really important. And when Pernita starts to eat Nemu's remains, Mayuri makes sure to recover her brain before it can be devoured. And while this is played off as the key to defeating Pernita, since without it, the parts of Nemu he took in, the parts that evolve at such an exponential rate that they kill him. So it was important to defeating him that Mayuri hold on to the brain, but I don't think that was the only reason he made sure to keep it. I personally think it was much more sentimental than that, and possibly to hopefully restore her. But in typical Mayuri fashion, it was a brilliant and logical thing to do at the end of the fight. When it comes down to it, does Mayuri view Nemu as his child or as nothing more than a project? Early in the series, he definitely only viewed her as an experiment, even when he called her his daughter, but as time has passed, and as she's evolved, his view of her has clearly evolved as well. There's a struggle there for him because the line is blurred between her being nothing more than a creation and her becoming an actual person. The project's success is really based on, can this experiment become something real? Can this evolve and learn like a person can? And she has. She has done exactly as she was really meant to do. She's grown up like all people do. I don't think it's a big leap to suggest that Nemu might be the only person that he ever has cared about, and that the only person he could care about is someone that came from his genius. There's pride there, and someone could argue that he's just proud of what he's made, but I think we've talked about plenty that shows that it goes beyond that for him. But I don't think Mayuri understands that. I don't think he understands the emotions he's developed. I don't think he can comprehend really thinking of himself as an actual father. He's a very smart man in a lot of ways, but I don't think this is something he can analyze. At least not in his usual manner. And I'm not really sure how Mayuri feels about himself on that level. He obviously focuses on himself sometimes, whether it's changing his face paint, or the modifications he's done to his own body. But I don't know if he really ever focused much on his feelings and contemplated his own emotions much. The way that the Xyloporo scene ended could hint about how he handles self-reflection. He might just destroy the thought anytime he starts to feel anything that he doesn't want to feel. And with how quickly he pops these thoughts out of his head, it's like he's not only keeping those thoughts from himself, but trying to hide those most vulnerable musings, the conflict in his soul, from us as viewers. It was so effective. Kubo's so good sometimes at really getting into these characters' heads by doing very little. We don't need chapters upon chapters of Mayuri's backstory. We don't need him to go into a huge inner monologue. We just get a glimpse of his thought process and what's going on in there, if only for a few seconds. But make no mistake, Mayuri is still a person who has done terrible, terrible, terrible things and unabashedly enjoyed committing atrocities. He's probably one of the most evil characters in the series. Entertaining, love the guy as a character, but he's done some real bad stuff. And I think it's because of that all of this is so fascinating and as good as it is. This isn't giving him redemption, and it's not erasing any of those horrors. But what's going on with his relationship with Nemu is giving me more to chew on and more possible layers to his character. Layers that go deeper than even he might be aware of. Like, I've been thinking a lot about Mayuri while working on this, and about why he may dress the way he does and change his face paint so often, and I've thought a lot about why he may do this. Knowing him, it could have actual use that I'm not aware of, but to me, it feels like Mayuri changes himself so often because of his disbelief in perfection, a physical manifestation of how he views that concept and how he prefers imperfection and change, so to never settle on something, to never be satisfied with one look. So many of the other characters have barely changed their appearance. They had like the pre-time skip appearance and the post-time skip appearance, and then some of those changes are so small they look exactly the same. But Mayuri has always fluctuated from the first time we met him. Every arc he's different, never thinking what he's done is perfect. After all, that's what all of this really boils down to. He loves Nemu because she's always changing, never perfect, but that's what makes her perfect to him, even if he'd never admit it. I have been vocal this whole arc about how I thought he was going to be torn apart by Quincy specifically for the things he did to their people, or that Uryu would get a chance to finally kill him, or that he'd just have to finally face the consequences for all the horrible things he's done. That felt like a natural place to go for him with the Quincy's coming back, but instead, we just haven't. And while a part of me thinks that should have happened, and maybe it still will by the end, another part of me is okay with it because of what he's been given as a character. Yeah, I think maybe his crimes against the Quincy should have maybe been brought up, but he's also such a fun character to read, even if he deserved a horrible end at the hands of the Quincy's. I think I would miss Mayuri too much if the Quincy's executed him like I thought they were going to do during the first invasion. Does he deserve a painful end? Yeah, but I don't know. Kubo's made him so essential, not only for the enjoyment of the story, but for all of the characters. I've talked about it over and over, but he really has been one of the characters that's played the biggest part in the war. He's been crucial to keeping the Soul Society from being defeated. In a certain light, he's almost been heroic, but that crazy mad scientist aspect never disappeared either. Did I expect to feel this emotional reading about something involving Mayuri? Hell no. But that's exactly what made it so powerful. The unexpected, heartwarming nature of what's lying underneath that relationship. The small pinprick of goodness Mayuri has in him, buried very, very, very deep, that he would never acknowledge and that he rejects completely, but it's still there. And it's not just me that sees Mayuri in a bit of a new light by the end of this. At the start of the video, I talked about how he didn't have respect in the same way that Kenpachi did. Only after this, he finally gains a bit of that from Kenny's own officers, as thanks for Mayuri saving their captain. And he also saves Hitsugaya and Rangiku. He unzombifies them. Can you also unzombify Rose and Kensei? I don't know, they like died. But yeah, he's doing all this stuff for his fellow Soul Reapers, and earns a newfound respect from his colleagues. It's a beautiful moment. He's a nerd that earned recognition from the crazy delinquent kids that worship muscle over mind. Like, I would imagine Mayuri, before this, was one of the captains that Squad 11 respected the least. Yet here they are, showing him absolute gratitude and respect. And that was also great. And as Mayuri is placed into a healing pod, clutching what's left of his daughter, I love that his thought process cycles back to one of the most important driving forces of his life. His rivalry with Kisuke Urahara, believing that his achievement with Nemu's creation and her development finally proves that his intellect is superior to Urahara's. He takes a lot of comfort and joy in that, and I'm actually really happy for him. But the real best part about that moment is that we as an audience know that that might not be true. Urahara is no stranger to having mysterious accomplices of his own in the two kids that hang out at his shop, who have been hinted at as being more than just children plenty of times in the series. They are probably a lot like Nemu, artificial souls. So Urahara may have already one-upped Mayuri once again, but for the moment, I'm glad Mayuri can rest and take comfort in the thought, and since he recovered Nemu's brain, I assume she'll be brought back in some form as like model number 8 or something. And while I want there to be casualties of characters in this war, I honestly think that her return wouldn't ruin her death, because that sacrifice gave us that flicker of grief in Mayuri, which we wouldn't have gotten otherwise. And him bringing her back would just confirm even more how much he cares about her specifically. So yeah, bring her back and show Urahara your unique accomplishment that he could never dream of doing or competing with. It'll be great, Mayuri, I'm sure. It'll be great. In closing, Mayuri Kuretsuchi most definitely is not a good person, but he has been absolutely instrumental in this war, and as we've seen here, there's a glimmer of good in all of that warped darkness. Not enough to absolve him, but enough to add an interesting little aspect to an already fascinating character. And making me believe that there is even a spark of humanity within someone like Mayuri Kuretsuchi is an accomplishment in itself, and something only a damn good storyteller could do. This was a lot, and I honestly don't think I even covered everything, but this was probably the most notes I've taken for a video besides Everything But the Rain. Because this dynamic was so fascinating. It's so contradictory and sweet and horrifying, but touching and awful and great and complicated, and I think that's what makes it special. You really have to dig to try to get a clear picture of Mayuri, and I still only think I've scratched the surface, and he's not really meant to be fully understood. But from the small glimmer of caring in Mayuri to Nemu fully realizing her independence, it was fantastic. And if I haven't made it clear enough yet, shockingly emotional. I always thought Mayuri would be nothing more than an entertaining, weird character that's fun to watch, but somehow, some way, he's shown to be just a little bit more than that. Not that he would ever admit to it. Whew, thank you so much for watching, guys. This was a long video, I know, but my voice is hoarse. Yeah, there was a lot, but I appreciate you watching. If you like what you see, please comment, like, subscribe. If you want to support the channel, please join the Patreon. We have hours and hours of manga read-alongs and anime reactions over there. Thank you for listening to my rant. Thank you for listening to my announcement. Yeah, crazy times. Life keeps changing. I'll see you guys soon. Take care.